Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it might be for you or night. Welcome to day 3 of the Leadership Forum with the Global Summit. And I'm very excited to kick today off with a very important topic and one that has a lot of ideas and thought leadership and definitely action around it. And we have 2 women who are with us today that are definitely part of the action. And so we'll get into that. But today we're going to be talking about thriving by design. So what are the conditions for a regenerative society? If you look up what the word thrive means in Merriam-Webster, it says there's 3 definitions: to grow vigorously, number 2, to gain in wealth or possession, and number 3 is to progress towards or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. I think you could say that thanks to COVID and coronavirus, the third one is really apropos. The idea of a regenerative society and the idea of how one thrives was very relevant before and has become hyper relevant more than ever before. And what we're going to be talking about in the session is thinking about how at this moment, when we are pausing as a humanity all around the world, and the upheaval and the uncertainty that has existed but compounded by coronavirus, is to say, how are we going to make it through? How are we going to prepare the ground for something better to emerge? At the kickoff of the Leadership Forum, I read a poem that was specifically about this, where the poem was a letter from COVID-19 to humans, asking us to stop, just stop and listen. And who we have here today are 2 extremely very active individuals in the world of regenerative societies and thrivability. We have an author, facilitator, and consultant, Michelle Holliday, who proposes that we need an expanded story to be able to see what else is possible beyond our current habits of thought and action. During today's session, she'll outline the shift we're living through from a mechanism paradigm to one based on life and living systems. Michelle is a facilitator, speaker, and researcher, as well as author of the book, The Age of Thrivability: Vital Perspectives and Practices for a Better World. She brings people together and helps them discover ways they can feel more alive, connect more meaningfully with each other, and serve life more powerfully through their work. And this often involves accompanying pioneering organizations as they craft a bold manifesto and then design the ways they will live into it. Her work centers around thrivability, a set of beliefs, intentions, and practices based on a view of organizations as living systems. As part of the worldwide art of hosting community of practice, she regularly hosts public conversations and workshops on this topic. And her research is summarized in an online slideshow called Humanity 4.0 that you can find online. And in a conversation with Michelle today in a very unscripted format, so it will be very spontaneous and lots of energy, we will also be joined by pioneering visionary vegan chef and entrepreneur, Ms. Miyoko Schinner, who will share her perspectives on this shift, as well as the stories of how it is lived out in her organization, Miyoko's Creamery. And just to share a little bit more about Miyoko-san, Ms. Schinner is the fearless CEO and founder of Miyoko's, a food brand combining culinary traditions with food technology to revolutionize dairy by making cheese and butter without cows. Through an innovative proprietary process that merges food science with old world creamery methods, Ms. Schinner has successfully scaled the production of fermented cheese and cultured butter made from plants. Under Schinner's visionary leadership, she has replaced animal dairy products on the shelves of more than 15,000 retailers nationwide and in Canada, including Target, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Kroger, and Safeway. She is the pioneer of the plant-based cheese revolution and is a passionate culinarian, former restaurateur, best-selling cookbook author, co-host of the national public television cooking show Vegan Mashup, and a founding board member of the Plant-Based Foods Association. She's also co-founded Rancho Compasión, a farmed animal sanctuary in California that provides a home to over 70 farm animals. And she lives with her husband and 3 grown children, 2 dogs, and 4 cats. So I am in the company of titans in this industry, and I'm by far the least accomplished among the three of us. And so what I would really love to do is open the aperture for Michelle and for Miyoko-san to basically have a conversation. And I think the two ways that these women are approaching this topic of thrivability and regenerative societies will give us a couple of different lenses into this, and one where I think there's going to be some very common ground found as thought leaders and authors of these very important pieces of work with their books. So without much further ado, Michelle, can I hand it over to you to open up the conversation?
Yes, thank you, Rika. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to the whole team behind the Global Summit for bringing us together. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you, Miyoko, and I will do more than my share of talking at the beginning, and then we'll have a bit more of a balanced conversation. But I've been asked to give an overview of this movement that's arising in the world towards a more regenerative society, a more thrivable society, as I would say. So I'd like to give that overview in sort of general principles and theories, and then together we can get to a more grounded level and bring it to the practical and lived experience, especially as you're living it and experiencing it in your organization. So let me share my screen to begin with. I've got a few pictures that help make the point that I want to make. So Rika explained that the way I understand this shift towards a regenerative society is first of all, and most fundamentally, a shift from one paradigm, one worldview, or one guiding story to another. We're moving from a story that sees everything in the universe as a machine to one that sees it as an ecology of living systems. And it's worth spending a little bit of time on this outgoing story because it's so all pervasive that it's hard even to recognize it as a story and a choice. You know, if we can't see it, then we can't make different choices. So I want to just take a couple of minutes and share how I see that story that we're trying hard to move away from. So in this paradigm that is still the dominant guiding story of our societies, the only thing that matters is productivity and profitability. And in that story, we are understood to be separate from each other, separate from nature, and separate from our organizations. We are human resources or human capital that are put into the machine, right? And so I think of it like a meat grinder. We're ground up and spit out, something is spit out the other side of the machine to a passively waiting customer who is also separate from the machine. And in that story, our only purpose is to compete and consume, right? And the way to understand anything is to break it down into its separate parts. The most effective approach to anything is to seek to standardize and to seek efficiency. So this story has come to shape every aspect of our lives. It shapes how we structure learning, how we approach health, how we grow food. And Miyoko, I think this would speak most of all to your work, this aspect of how the mechanistic story shapes agriculture and food, and it shapes how we structure work. And the problem that to be fair to this story, it's not all wrong. There are mechanistic aspects to how we work and how we live. The problem is that this mechanistic story leaves out really important parts of the story, really important parts of the plot. And in doing that, it leads to all kinds of problems. We're coming to understand that every major problem we face in society can be traced back to this mechanistic story. And the real problem is that within that story, within the logic of that story, no other actions make sense and no other outcomes are possible. we're sort of stuck in this dead end story, and it's a story that's ultimately leading us to catastrophe, leading us to a cliff of extinction ultimately. The good news is that we're starting to see signs of a more life-aligned story, including among the signs, this explosion of new terminology and new approaches, things like social innovation, corporate social responsibility, the sharing economy, regenerative economies, self-organization, business as ecosystems. None of these terms or approaches make sense from within the machine story. Why would we have to specify impact investing when the machine story tells us that the purpose of investing is only to make money for the investors, right? Why would we have to talk about corporate social responsibility when the only responsibility an organization has is to its shareholders? All of these terms are a sign that our lens, our story is starting to expand to take in more of what's true in the world and more of what's needed. And ultimately to take into account life. So I like this chart. I want to take you through this chart as one way of understanding that shift in story. This is a spectrum of approaches. I think of it as a spectrum of intentions and impact. So we're here now at the far left, the conventional approach. This is still the dominant approach within our industries and our organizations and across society. And the impact is fundamentally degenerative. It reduces life's ability to thrive. So in agriculture, for example, conventional approaches to growing food are reducing the soil's ability to grow food. Scientists tell us that we have only 50 seasons left before the world's soil can no longer produce food. So it's net degenerative. And as we started to realize that this, not only in agriculture, but in every industry and every aspect of our lives, we moved into green approaches where we tried to be a little bit less bad. And as we recognized that that wasn't enough, we moved towards sustainability, trying to sustain things at a steady state. And now we're starting to realize that even that isn't enough, that we've done so much damage and harm that we really need to be actively restoring and even regenerating. Regenerating is sort of another word for healing and for supporting any living system's intrinsic ability to heal itself, to regenerate itself and generate itself. And so we see this trend in agriculture as well. As we recognize the damage done by conventional agriculture, we're moving towards regenerative methods of farming in which we recognize that soil is a living system capable of regenerating itself. And so the farmer is adopting methods that work with soil's inherent abilities. So it's a more aligned set of methods and approaches. So I want to make it clear that this is not a timeline or a linear pathway in which we have to start at conventional, move our way to green and sustainable, and eventually maybe we'll get to this far off utopia of being regenerative. First, we don't have time for that. We need to get to regenerative methods and healing our life support systems, healing our communities, and healing ourselves as quickly as possible. And fundamentally, this line represents that shift in story and worldview. This, on the left side of the spectrum, it's a story that tells us that our work is to fix the machine, or even just to tweak the machine and make it work a little bit better. And on this side, the story tells us that we are gardeners, that we are farmers, that we are cultivating life's ability to thrive. This is another chart that helps to make the difference clear. And it's sort of a different way of portraying that same spectrum of intentions and impacts. So in the first, this is sort of conventional methods that the linear economy would propose a straight line to trash, make, waste is the saying. And we've seen how much trouble that's getting us into. And so we moved into green strategies of recycling and doing a little bit less harm, delaying the harm. The next movement that we've seen is the emergence of the circular economy. This is sort of sustainability. Let's see how long we could sustain things in the same cycle without getting to trash. But the regenerative movement is a fundamentally different mindset, worldview, and set of approaches that works with life's underlying patterns, that invites us to see ourselves not as mechanics and engineers driving a machine, but again, as gardeners or stewards caring for life's ability to thrive in the biosphere and in our organizations as living ecosystems, in our communities as living ecosystems. So this is how I talk about regeneration. I talk about this idea of thrivability, of enabling life to thrive in the informed intention and practice of creating the fertile conditions for life to thrive for individuals, for the organization as a living ecosystem, for customers, for community, and the biosphere. And first we have to be informed, because if we're going to enable to create the fertile conditions for life to thrive, we have to have some sense of what that requires of us, what that involves. We have to set this as our intention. Currently, in most of society, we set our sights on some much smaller intention. We don't have a clear intention for enabling life to thrive. And as a result, we're getting something far less, disastrously less than life thriving. And so if we never set that as our intention, we'll never get there. And finally, we have to recognize that it's an ongoing practice. What's needed is entering into a life practice, a learning practice of understanding what it means to align with life, to steward the life within our organizations and our communities and the ecosystems that we're part of. This is not a marketing campaign. This is not one department like a sustainability department. This is something that we all need to embrace and explore as a practice of ever deepening in wisdom and compassion and the ability to sense what's needed and to respond with effective action. So we're a little bit behind time, and I wanted to share with you 4 fertile conditions that I find in every living system, whether it's in our bodies or a rainforest or an ant colony or our organizations or our communities. I don't think I'm going to do that. You can look at my online presence, michelleholliday.com, or just search for my name and you'll find lots and lots of resources about these 4 fertile conditions that we have to nurture: the parts, the individuals within any organization or community. We have to support the flow and connection of relationship. And we have to, I'm just giving you the quickest overview to save time, enable people to come together around a powerful and compelling shared purpose. This is what enables a new level of life to emerge, like a rainforest, with new capabilities and characteristics that we don't find at the level of the parts. And we have to recognize that all of it is self-organizing and self-integrating, self-managing, self-generating, if it is to thrive. And so rather than a command and control approach that the mechanistic story would propose, here again, we find ourselves as gardeners and stewards of the ecosystem that is our organization or our community. And in these ways, we shift our role, we shift the purpose of our work to cultivating those fertile conditions for life to thrive. Our purpose has to be to shape every project as a practice ground for a more thrivable world, every project and every organization. Our society doesn't need more stuff as much as it needs us to learn together how to be better humans and how to be in better alignment with life and life's ability to thrive. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll stop sharing. And now I'm eager to hear from Miyoko, and let's see. I wonder, Miyoko, if you would like to say anything about Miyoko's Creamery, and more generally, how does all of this land with you? What I'm sharing, and how are you living it out in your organization?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. That was a really compelling presentation. Really enjoyed it, and you made a very, very clear point that thrivability is something that is the responsibility of every individual on this planet as we go forward. I do have a couple of questions about that I'd like everyone to think about, which is when we talk about the thrivability of life, whose life are we talking about? When we talk about to whom, who we are thinking about in terms of ensuring a planet that survives, not only survives, but thrives, for whose benefit are we trying to do that? So I want to just talk a little bit about this farmed animal sanctuary I have. We started rescuing farmed animals about 5 years ago, and we have everything from cows and pigs and goats and sheep and ducks and geese and turkeys and so on. And I've been so fortunate, I've been so blessed to be able to spend a lot of time with them. And sometimes I will just spend an entire afternoon sitting out there in the grass, communing with the animals. I have, for example, a goose named Echo, whose best friend is Angel the cow. And the Echo loves me as well, and he'll spend an entire afternoon with me. And I will sit and just watch the goats and see how they live their lives. And it makes me wonder, whose life are we trying to preserve this planet for? Is it just us humans? Because everything that we do, we think about it as from a very anthropocentric perspective, where we're trying to ensure this planet survives for humans so that our grandkids and their grandkids and their grandkids, 7 generations on, as the Native Americans thought, will have a beautiful planet to live on. We don't often think about other species and their right to occupy this planet and thrive as well. If we think about the last 60 years, actually last 50 years, over the last 50 years since 1970, we have lost 60% of all species on this planet due to man's activities. Right now, 96% of all mammals that occupy the planet are either humans or livestock. So we're talking only 4% of the mammals left on this planet are actually wild. Why is that? There are many things that humans have done to actually destroy their habitats so they cannot thrive while we build cities, while we build businesses, all the mechanistic things that you talked about. While we have gone forth to preserve our life, to create a quality of life that we can enjoy, we have done that at the cost of other living beings and destroying their ecosystems. Everything from building cities, but actually more importantly, agriculture. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of ecosystem destruction and the extinction of species. So when I think about who needs to thrive in the future, whose lives do we need to protect, I think about the lives of all, that we need to do this not only for humans, but we need to do this for all living beings on this planet. And they are all entitled to an equal opportunity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've learned from observing animals for long stretches of time is that they're not trying to figure out, how can I have a bigger house? How can I become, climb this corporate ladder and conquer the universe and become famous? They're simply being. They have discovered the gift of being present in the moment and communing with whatever, with the other creatures in the field, with me, with whatever activity they're doing. And they are at complete peace with themselves. There's so much that we can learn from the simplicity with which animals live. And the beauty with which they navigate this planet without destroying it.
Mhm.
They don't take land away from other animals. They don't, each and every single animal in nature lives in a very beautifully balanced ecosystem that maintains itself before man comes and tries to destroy it.
Mhm.
So, everyone knows we're in a pandemic right now. To me, this is a time for the world to reset and really, really think about um, what sort of world do we want to create? Because it's not just a matter of what kind of world is inevitably about to happen. We have a choice in that matter. We can create the world that we want to create. And that means that more than ever, the time is right for humans, for each individual to take matters into his and her own hands and become accountable for creating the future. What that means in terms of a business is, I don't think of my company, and I guess it's still considered a startup. I founded the company about 6 years ago. We've grown to become one of the fastest growing companies in the plant-based space in the United States, and we're a leader. We're a category leader in plant-based dairy for butter and cheese. But I didn't start the company so I could become a successful entrepreneur of a CPG company, a consumer packaged goods company, and at some point retire having sold it to a strategic. I did it because we needed to change the world. And the reality is we don't live like the animals. We're not living in tune with nature. We live in an economic system that where corporations have a huge amount of not only resources but power. And we live in a system that has adopted a certain type of diet and certain types of practices all around. And in order to change that, railing, protesting, showing, having signs out there and marching in front of whatever might open up some eyes. But in order to create a wholesale change, we have to change the economy. And that economy has to become one that is compassionate. And I think that is absolutely the most important word. Is we have to start operating from a place of caring, from a place of love, from a place of actually showing compassion towards those that have suffered under our rule and building them back up. So my company is, oftentimes people say, well, we're a mission-based company. We're trying to save this or that or the other thing. We're not a mission-based company. We're a mission with a company. We're a mission. I've been an activist for over 30 years, and I've had a number of businesses, but more and more as I realized, as I get older, as I have matured as a business person, I've realized that the only reason to start a business is to have an economic impact that can create a regenerative society and world, not just for humans, but for all living beings.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I wonder if you have been influenced in these views of yours by the two cultures that you come from. Can you identify the kind of the origins within the two, or is it a mix? And I ask in particular because this summit seems to span those two cultures most of all.
Sure. It's interesting. I was born in Japan. I moved here as a child, then I moved back to Japan. And when I was living there as an adult in my early 20s, which is actually when I became a vegan, which is strange because there were no vegans in Japan at the time. There are now, but not at the time. One thing I found rather odd when I actually moved back to the United States was this obsession with individuality. Now, when I was living in Japan in my early 20s and learning to sort of, express who I was and discover who I was, it seemed odd to me that this was a society that was so concerned about society as a whole and being part of the community and not, being the nail that sticks out and that sort of thing. But when I moved back to the United States, I found that people valued their own individuality more than that of society, their own individual rights, like gun rights, for example. It's more important that people people here feel like their right to own a gun is more important than whether or not someone dies because of that gun. Same thing with not wearing a mask. In Japan, when people have a cold, you automatically put a mask on because that's the polite thing to do, because you want to protect, you're thinking about the greater society, not just yourself. Here we have activists that will not put a mask on because it's their individual right not to put a mask on. And they're not, is it their individual right that someone's going to get sick because they're not wearing a mask?
Right.
And it shocks me the extent to which individuality is emphasized in the United States. I don't think we're at a point in history anymore when we can push individuality anymore. We have to start thinking about society as a whole. We have to go beyond ourselves and start thinking about our neighbors, about our friends, about the stranger down the street. And because we don't, our society is broken. Our communities are broken. There was a time in human history when a stranger could knock on your door, and if they were a hungry wanderer, you'd invite them in and you'd break bread, you'd give them food. We don't do that. If a stranger knocks on your door, you shoo them away, or you go out there with your shotgun and you tell them to, that's right.
Yeah.
What kind of world have we come to when we would rather guard our own individuality, where we end up alone in our apartments watching television, than a society where people come together to share ideas, to help each other, to grow strong and to grow old together?
Right. It's part of why I emphasize these 4 fertile conditions that are found in all living systems. And one of them is that the individual parts can flourish and thrive. So the individual is supported and is invited to express, but as a way to contribute to the whole, to serve the whole. If there's an individual that is only in it for themselves, that's cancer. That's the function of a cancerous cell. So that's kind of a shift in thinking. I'm from the US originally, but now I live in Canada, and I see the stark difference in those values as well.
Yeah. And you see those values, it's really particularly the United States. And I think it's a misinterpretation of the documents of our founding fathers, because if you go to Europe, people value society and community much more as well, as they do in Japan. And so, I think American businesses and Americans in general really we're going to have to band together. We're going to have to work together. And I do see that shift happening, especially among the younger generation, especially among Gen Zers, et cetera. They are the most so-called woke generation that I think the world has ever seen. And they are all thinking about, what sort of future do we want to build? I feel very fortunate that I'm part of this so-called plant-based foods industry, where people often say to me, what do you think about that? That other vegan cheese company, aren't they your competitor? And I always say, yes, they're technically my competitor, but I think of them as collaborators in a mutual space where we're trying to grow a category together and raise everybody up, rather than pitting one brand against the other, which is the way that I think businesses have been structured in the past. But if the common goal for many of the companies in my category is to make the world better, to make it more sustainable, to save the lives of other living beings besides humans, then we can only do that in concert with each other. We can't do that if we're throwing, eggs at each other. That just doesn't work. We have to lift each other up. And so this is the most, I love this space. I love this, this category, the plant-based space, because companies do work together. They band together. I've met so many wonderful CEOs of so-called competitor companies. And
do you know the etymology of the word? Competition is striving together.
Striving together.
It's, Spanish, con is with. So
that's exactly right.
With, striving with. So if you didn't have any competitors, you would be bored and lonely. If you wanted to play tennis, how could you play it alone? You need a competitor who will challenge you and inspire you to new accomplishments. So
that's right, and make you better. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot that we need to do to get back to understanding, what's just the etymology of that. That's
Right.
absolutely true. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So, in my company, we spend a lot of time talking about uh, not just regeneration of the regenerative aspect of a business, but we talk about everything from social justice to animal rights. We have company-wide meetings where we discuss, Black Lives Matter. We discuss animal welfare. We talk about the injustices in the food system.
Mhm.
There's actual racism inherent in the food system, for example.
Mhm.
And so we try to look at everything through the lens of food because we're a food company. But
Mhm.
our primary goal is to eliminate injustice in the food system and create a more sustainable future. Um, this isn't just my goal. Not every employee that comes to Miyoko's is a vegan or interested in this, but they get a big dose of it because we have not necessarily mandatory discussions, but we have discussions for about 1/3 of the company. We have about 160 employees right now, and we'll have 50 people on Zoom calls where we have these discussions about racism in the food system, uh, or or so many of the other injustices that we find. Creating a sustainable economy, et cetera. And we have these active discussions because we want every individual in the company to think about it. Because when we all think about it, we're just much stronger.
That's fabulous. It occurred to me recently that there isn't a commons where we can easily engage with neighbors around these important topics that affect all of us. And it really may be up to businesses and organizations to step up and offer that, to create a space in which we can uh, offer a practice ground for a more thrivable world. So I absolutely love that you're doing exactly that, not only in how you operate and what you do, but in the nature of your conversations and your larger intentions. That's
Yeah,
really
but we need
wonderful.
to create that, I think, in our communities as well too. And that, I think it's very, very possible. I think what the pandemic is showing is that people are tired of being alone. Many
Mhm.
people don't have families; they live alone, and having that limited access to a community is bearing down very, very hard on many individuals. So I think what we're getting to a point is there was a time when we thought, oh, I'm going to grab my sandwich and go eat it in front of my computer or TV. I think what people are beginning to value is we actually need community. We actually need to sit across the table from someone and share a meal together. That we need community more than ever because we've been forced into isolation. Whereas
Mhm.
before, maybe we chose isolation on our own. We didn't want neighbors knocking on our door anymore. And people just started like 30 years ago. If you just think back, we knew all our neighbors.
Mhm.
Today, people never see their neighbors.
Mhm.
And I think people today are now beginning to make that shift, saying this is not a viable society. We need to restructure communities and societies so that we actually come in contact with each other again and we get to know each other and we support each other and we start to trust each other again because we had gotten to a point where we didn't trust anyone. If a stranger came to your door, as I said earlier, you would shoo them away because it's like who knocks on someone's door?
Right.
It unless you're a Jehovah's Witness or something. I mean, it
Right.
just our society and
Mhm.
and how we communicate, um, they're
Mhm.
broken.
Exactly. We're realizing how fragile our
Yes.
social systems are, how vulnerable we are not to have those connections, and how much we crave them, as you're saying. Exactly. Rika, do we have time for another question? Or are you
Well, actually, so I was just going to jump in for a moment because I've been doing a lot of work for diversity on boards, private and public company boards. So my venture is called Board Seat Meet, and part of our
Oh, mhm.
initiative that we're doing is we're writing a book called Dear Chairwoman. And the book is where we're interviewing women who are on boards and the journey to the boardroom. And we're converting those interviews into letters as if they were writing to the women of tomorrow. And one of the board members that we interviewed, Kathy Waller, so you'll say, Dear Chairwoman, my name is Kathy and this is my story, and then love Kathy at the end of it. So it's almost an ode to the Generation Z and the young millennials to think about the chairwoman role, right? Not so much genderizing the title, but Kathy Waller in particular came to mind. She's the former CFO of Coca-Cola. She's on the board of Beyond Meat. And she's an extraordinary African-American leader and woman. And so I mean, I'd be curious, I'd love to kind of connect the two of you, because this whole point that you made about racism in the food industry, I wonder how much that is in Beyond Meat's, you know, boardroom conversations, with diversity being such a hot topic right now of sustainability and thrivability, right? So, and also just along those lines is the role of the board having really transformed. You know, it used to be that the board responsibility was the fiduciary responsibility to maximizing shareholder value, at least for public company boards, right? And I think that you're starting to see much more of this ethos of value is not just the bottom line dollar or stock price. Value is really driven by the impact that you make, and whether it's a carbon footprint, or whether it's the diversity that you have in your workforce, or whether it's thinking about your human capital when a pandemic hits, and things like that. So, but yeah, I think we're coming up on time. I just want to see, are we able to see if there are any questions for the host?
And while you look, I want to offer two thoughts, reactions to what you've just shared. One is where I think we need to go is to recognize that life is the true bottom line, you know, that enabling life to thrive has to be the bottom line for boards to take into consideration. And the other thing is that one step in that direction that I'm seeing happen in different places in the world is that elements of nature are starting to be given a seat on the board. A river will be given a seat on the board, or a forest that is part of the surrounding ecosystem of that company. So, and often it will be an indigenous person who will represent the river, but it's clear that the river has a seat on the board. And I think that's a really powerful shift.
Yeah, actually, I just heard on NPR about a woman that I think was Flint, Michigan, right? The situation with the undrinkable water, where she's going to court where water is a plaintiff.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So,
yeah.
But I think, so just to check in with Melanie, the host, are we able to see if there are any questions from folks who are watching this real time? I'm not sure if we are. Probably not. Well, why don't we do this? I think, you know, you shared, people can find you on LinkedIn, people can find you on your website. People will hopefully be able to find Miyoko on store shelves, her product, and the gifts to people with her cheese, which I'm excited to try. I haven't tried it yet.
Me too.
So let's just say, you know, do you have any last thoughts or comments as we get into, at least for the US, is going to be an interesting election cycle. You know, hopefully as we come out of this first wave of the pandemic, any thoughts about as we come into the holiday season, end of year, and into 2021?
Yeah, you know, what I want to say is that I think there's a lot of fear among people, and there's a sense of helplessness. Well, you know, what can I do? And what I'd like to stress is that there's an opportunity now more than ever for people to have an impact, for individuals' voices to be heard, for individuals to take actions that can reverse climate change, end injustices, save lives. And there are so many different things that you can do, from you know, not eating animals, to joining a board, to helping a local organization, to volunteering, to fighting, you know, for at local in underserved communities. I mean, there are so many opportunities for each and every single one of us to make a change, to make a difference, and it's that collective thing. So I think a lot of people just think, what can I do? Well, there's a lot you can do, and all you have to do is just sit back and think about that. And I encourage everyone to seize the moment, seize the opportunity. You are important.
That's wonderful. I want to just reiterate something you said, Miyoko, that I absolutely love, that Miyoko's Creamery is not a mission-driven company. It's a mission with a company. That is fantastic. I think that's exactly what's needed to transform the power of coming together as a collective, as a company to support the many missions that we have need of. So thank you for sharing that. I will share that broadly as I point people to your company and to your products and your great example. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, Rika.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, that was our session around thriving by design and conditions for a regenerative society. Hope you learned some things, got inspired, are ready to go get some of Miyoko's cheese from the shelves and pick up Michelle's book. Let's make things happen and take some action, people. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Mhm.